Welcome back, everybody, to today's webinar here at BINA. Today we are going to talk about the topic about separation between church and state in Judaism. So I use that expression because that's the terminology which is used most commonly in America, that principle of separation church and state, but basically in all Western societies, the concept of separating religion from the state. So in other words, there's the state, there are the laws of the state, which are secular in nature. No particular religion is forced upon anybody. Anybody can live the way they want to. There's freedom of religion. So there's sort of a separation there between church, between religion, whatever religion it is, and state. So what we're going to discuss today is what is the view of Judaism on this concept of separating religion from the state. Was that done historically in Judaism? Will that be done ever again? In general, what is our view on separating religious life and religious obligation from the way we govern the country? So before we even begin, just to point out two very, very important points. First of all, just on a very practical level, I think it's very important to point out that as Jews, we have benefited primarily from societies which have a separation of church and state. Any country which we've been living in that forced upon its citizens a certain way of life, a certain religion, as a general rule, that didn't do very well for us. Throughout history, whether it was Christianity or Islam or any other religion that was being forced upon the Jewish people, historically speaking, that was not a good thing, and we have greatly benefited from living in societies where there's no particular religion forced upon anybody could do whatever they want, freedom of religion, and we thrive as Jews because we're able to live the way we want to, we're able to practice our faith openly and proudly without fear of any persecution. So that's one thing, very important thing to point out. Another very important thing to point out is that this whole discussion is really in theory, because right now we have a rule called Dina de Malchusa Dina, which means that whatever the law of the land is, that is what we need to follow. So if the law of the land tells us that we need to live a certain way, that is the way we need to live. Now, when it comes to certain cases where there might be a contradiction between the law of the land and the laws of the Torah, that's a separate discussion. I believe we have had a webinar about that topic, when you would need to go against the law of the land in order to follow the law of the Torah. But as a general rule, Dina de Malchusa Dina, we follow the laws of the land. The law of the land is, to bring a very neutral example, that we have to stop the car when it comes to a red light. Whether Torah says that way or not is not really relevant, because the Torah doesn't discuss stopping by a red light. Maybe it does, because you need to protect yourself and other people. So there, in that case, would fit very well with Torah. But either way, that's the law of the land. That's what we need to follow. Dina de Malchusa Dina. So this is less of a practical question, more of a question in theory, and perhaps maybe we can learn a lesson for how we should actually live our lives today from this concept. So historically speaking, if you're talking about in history, when the Jewish people had their own independent country, independent state of the land of Israel, talking about in the days of King David and King Solomon, there definitely was no separation between church, between religion and state. The entire state was governed by Jewish law. In fact, the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish Supreme Court, if you want to call it that, which had the final say about practically everything, they sat in the temple, they sat in the Beis HaMikdash, which is the spiritual center of the Jewish people. The Sanhedrin was the source of all law, both laws which have to do with between man and God, and with laws which have to do with between man and our fellow man, between people. So the Sanhedrin ruled everything. They established the law of the land in every area of life, both religious, civil, legal, moral, everything was established through the laws of the Torah. There might have been separation of powers of some sort in the olden times. There was the king, there was the prophet, there was the Sanhedrin, but there definitely was no separation of religion and state. When Mashiach will come, the Sanhedrin will be re-established in the land of Israel, and we will once again have the power to enforce Jewish law. Whether nowadays that shall be done is a totally separate discussion, because nowadays we don't have a Sanhedrin. It will be very difficult to enforce something which we can't really enforce, because we can't give out the punishments which are described in the Torah, because we don't have a Sanhedrin. But we're talking about in the times of Mashiach, when the Sanhedrin will be restored, the Jewish country, the Jewish state, will once again be governed by Torah law. So what does it mean for us right now? Now, obviously, again, to repeat, when we went into exile, spread out to all the nations, we are obligated to now listen to the laws of the land. So what does it mean for us right now? Maybe there is a separation between religion and state where we live. But maybe in our own personal lives, we should perhaps bridge that divide and bring those two worlds together, meaning our physical, mundane life, together with our religious life, should merge together and become one. In fact, the verse tells us, "B'chol d'rachecha de'eu," which means in all your ways you shall know God. Our sages tell us, "Kol ma'asecha yu l'shem shamayim." All of your actions should be for the sake of heaven. The Rambam describes at great length that a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, doesn't only need to be unique in his spiritual life, but also needs to be unique in their physical mundane life, the way they eat, the way they sleep, the way they conduct themselves in family life. Everything has to be recognized that this is being done by a Torah Jew, by somebody who is a Torah scholar. In this week's Parsha, Parshas Mishpatim, which is quite a technical, mundane, physical parsha. What I mean by that is the laws discuss very physical and mundane things like owning slaves or legal transactions and monetary disputes, stealing, all of these types of things. It starts off with the words ve'ele hamishpatim, and these are the laws. Now, you don't usually start off a sentence with and ve'ela. Should have just said eila hamishpatim. These are the laws. Why the vav? So our sages tell us the reason why there's a vav is because it's telling me that it's a continuation from last week's parsha. Last week's parsha was Parshas Yisroi, where we talk about the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. What the Torah is telling us is that not only the deep and spiritual laws were given at Mount Sinai, rather the very mundane, technical, legal laws which are described in this week's parsha were equally given by God at Mount Sinai. Meaning, what does that mean practically speaking? It means practically speaking that even when we live these mundane things, we need to live them in a way which is all, first of all, based on Torah law. Second of all, even more than that, we are conscious of God through every single thing, by every single thing that we do. And perhaps in even a greater level, we can express God in everything that we do. God can be expressed and lived through and in every single aspect of our lives. In a few parshas ago, when we're discussing the slavery in Egypt, the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu went to Paroi, and he told them, "Let my people go." In Parshas Shmos, Hashem says, God says, "Let the Jewish people go." And Paroi tells them, "Lisluchu lesivloi seichem," go back to your work. Rashi explains, what does it mean, go back to your work? Rashi tells us, the commentary on the Torah tells us, that what Paroi was telling Moshe Rabbeinu was not let the Jewish people go back to work. The Jewish people were already working. He was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, you go back to work, you go back to your unique work, because Moshe Rabbeinu was part of the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi was never enslaved by the Egyptians. So Paroi was telling him, go back to your work, meaning your work in your house of study, whatever you guys do, just go back to it, and let the rest of the Jewish people do what they've been doing till now. That's where Rashi explains. Now the question is, why does Paroi say it that way? Why doesn't he just say, let the Jewish people continue to work? Why are you mixing in? Why does he emphasize, L'chu l'sivloi seichem, go back to your work? And the commentaries explain that what Paroi is telling Moshe Rabbeinu is you go back to your spiritual life and let the mundane physical Jews live their life separate from your life. Moshe Rabbeinu, the tribe of Levi, being the spiritual leader of the Jewish people, Paroi was telling him, we need spiritual people, very good, but you lock yourself in your homes, you stay in the study hall and let the regular common folk do their work separate as a separate thing, separated from your spiritual life. And of course, Pari represents evil, because that is really the greatest threat to living a Jewish life, is when you start separating the mundane from the spiritual. When you say that you have two lives, you live a double life. On the one hand, I live a spiritual life when I'm in shul, but when I'm outside into the world, suddenly I become a different person. No, it's not. That's what Pari says. When we go out of Egypt, what that means is, what we're telling Pari is, no, you were wrong. That the tribe of Levi, the spiritual people, or the spiritual aspects of our life should go back to their place and just stay in their place and be separate from the rest of our lives. Rather, no, our entire life is there for one purpose, as the Mishnah in Tractate Kiddushin tells us, Ani nivreisi l'shamish eskoini. I was created to serve my master. Every part of our life. I mean, this doesn't mean that I have to be doing spiritual things all day. No, what that means is, even when I'm doing physical things, even in those things shall be expressed the greatness of God and our connection to God. So to summarize, on a practical level, the countries which we live in today in Western society have a separation between religion and state, and that's probably much better for us because we're able to live our lives in a much freer way and live our religion the way we want to. However, in the olden times, when the Jewish people had full independence over the land of Israel, in the times of King Solomon and King David, definitely Jewish law governed the land of Israel. Mashiach will come, it will return to that. But perhaps today what we can do is live a little bit of a taste of the coming of Mashiach, in that we govern our own lives without a separation between religion and state. When it comes to keeping laws, yes, we follow the laws of the country, but in our own personal lives, let us not separate the religion, the spirituality, and the state, meaning the physical aspect of our lives. Have a wonderful day.